The state has not released the citation listing the alleged violations. So this is very, very shady. What did they get? And why can't they tell people what are they being accused of? What's up guys, this is Alan again, back with another video. And today we're going to talk about this article regarding a very unusual story. So here's the article. Kentucky ABC seizes bottles in raids in Lexington, Louisville, vintage bourbon stores. So apparently there's this new law regarding on how vintage whiskey is sold. So traditionally when you order liquor, you're getting it through a distributor. So for example, if you're a bar or a liquor store, you can't just buy it from Bevmo or a grocery store and sell it. There has to be invoices. You need to prove where you got it. It has to go through distributors. So like for example, if I'm out of Grey Goose at my bar, I can't go to grab another bottle of Grey Goose from the store and bring it and sell it at my bar. That's just the way that the laws are written. And a lot of this has to do with the ABC and how they control sales of liquor. So the thing about vintage spirits, a lot of these whiskeys, you can't get it through a distributor because they're limited releases. So you can't just order, usually order form, you send it to the distributors, they look at it, then they send it the next day or two. But for vintage spirits, let's look at something that's more common. Let's look at something that's a modern Yamazaki 18. That's allocated. You can't just put it up there and then, you get it because it's just super, super rare. So let's take a look at, for example, the Pappy Van Winkles. A lot of those are very, very rare and you can't get through a distributor. And this is where this story is going to be talking about because you can't just fill out an order form for Pappy Van Winkle and get it because it's just so rare. Sometimes you can almost only buy them through an auction. So this article talks about this vintage liquor store. Okay. 2 prominent Kentucky liquor stores known for buying and selling vintage bourbons were raided Tuesday by the Kentucky ABC. According to the Kentucky Public Protection Cabinet, on January 17, the Kentucky Department of ABC conducted inspections at 2 retail locations of Justin's House of Bourbon. Because this is seemingly the first major enforcement action under Kentucky's vintage whiskey law, there is global interest among collectors in bourbon community. So right now, this is where it gets kind of crazy. I mean, if you collect bourbons, you probably are familiar that, a lot of these sales are kind of shady or not disclosed. Like, you don't know where to get them because it's like, how did you get a bottle of this? Like, you almost have to know somebody who works at the distillery to get something like this. But we're talking about a store that sells specifically vintage bourbon. So the majority of their collection is, it's very hard to find. What did the ABC seize at Justin's House of Bourbon? The state has not released the citation listing the alleged violations. So this is very, very shady. Like, what did they get? And why can't they tell people what are they being accused of? So according to the state, the ABC received complaints alleging several violations associated with Justin's House of Bourbon for improper acquisition, possession, transport, and sale of bourbon, including vintage distilled spirits. I mean, your store sells vintage, rare stuff, so it's like, how else are you going to get it? This is why it gets kind of shady. The question is, what's the purpose of this law? That's what I'm wondering. Is it to protect consumers from buying counterfeit bourbons? It's not like, who's this protecting? I don't understand. So the state seized numerous bottles of bourbon and other items of evidence were seized associated with the suspected improper purchasing and sale of these products. So as I mentioned before, a lot of these rare bourbons you can only buy in auctions or in the black market. And then when you have a store that sells primarily rare whiskeys, the question is, how do they get it? Like, how do they get so much? Like, I'm not really familiar with this shop. I'm not accusing them of, doing anything illegal. But, I mean, they have 2 locations. It has to be somewhat successful, and people have to know about it. This article was published in January 21st. And as I'm doing this right now, this is February 12th. So not too long ago that this article was written. And so far, there's no release on what they seized, why they seized, what they're being accused of. The investigation is continuing, according to the state. It said the state is not planning to release more information at this time. I mean, I think that's kind of important, because what if you are also a liquor store that sells rare spirits? Or what if you yourself has bought rare spirits? Why can't they tell people what happened? Because other people will be concerned too. And like they said, this is becoming like a global discussion among whiskey collectors. So under this new law, Kentucky ABC may inspect any premises where alcoholic beverages are manufactured, sold, stored, or otherwise trafficked in without first obtaining a search warrant, and may confiscate any contraband property. Routinely conduct inspections of our licensees to ensure their compliance with all statutes and regulations governing the alcohol industry. Okay. So, like, are they being accused of selling counterfeits, or, you know, buying stuff from the black market? Like, they're not giving any information on this. And, you know, this place it's a real shop, so I'm sure they have to be transparent about how they got this stuff, because that's their primary, that's their business. Justin Thompson, co-owner of Justin's House of Bourbon, in an email Thursday morning declined to comment on the ABC action, other than to say, "At this moment, all I will say is our license is active and we will be in business. We won't have any more comment until the investigation process is complete." The business is cooperating with the regulatory inquiry, Shu said in a statement. Given that Mr. Greer knows nothing about the details of the inquiry, we are unable to comment further. So this guy, he's an investor, and he doesn't even know what's going on. Like, does the shop owners even know what they're being accused of, or why they're being seized? And what are they going to do with this whiskey that they seized? They're going to destroy it? The Lexington location of Justin's House of Bourbon was scheduled to open at 10 a.m. Thursday, but a close sign was taped in the front door. According to the state, both licenses remain active. Well, so this is very strange. Why would they close the shop if they're still licensed? Yeah, there's like a lot of questions in this story. The company later said in a Facebook post that the Lexington store will reopen at noon on January 21st. So Thompson and Sloan, who are co-owners of the Bourbon Review magazine and website, opened their Lexington store in 2018 after the Kentucky General Assembly passed legislation in 2017 legalizing the purchase of sale of vintage spirits not regularly available. So we talked about this. So they actually passed a law that allows, the non-traditional way of the traditional way of getting alcohol is through distributors. But because, these spirits are very rare, most distributors don't have access to this. So this one, they're actually allowing the sale of vintage spirits. So the question is, if they allow this legally, then I'm wondering, like, what laws are they breaking? And, like earlier they said that they were being accused of, unlawful, like, acquisition of some of these bottles of whiskey. So I'm wondering, like, was this some kind of was this raid like set up by some like rival liquor store, or was there like an angry customer that bought bad whiskey from them? Like, it's kind of strange who even accused them of doing something illegal, because it's such a niche market. It's not like Bevmo where it's like a lot of chains. It doesn't affect the general population that much. The idea behind the law is collectors of vintage dusties, as the bottles are sometimes called, could legally sell to a licensed store who could then offer the unique item to the general public. So there's a place in Seattle that has that, where people they could actually put their private liquor at the bar, and then they could actually buy, ounce pours from that person. I'm not really sure how that law works, but the place I think is called Canon, and they do it in public, so they have to. It's not done. It's a very well-known bar, so they do it publicly, and I'm not really sure how the laws work at that place. So once again, this is ongoing. They don't know. They still don't have any information. So let's go to look at the law itself. This is updated, just a few days ago. So hopefully this will give some light on what's going on. In what appears to be the first enforcement since changes were made to allow the sale of collectible vintage bourbon, Kentucky's Department of, the ABC is investigating a retailer selling coveted rare spirits. So this refers to that article that we just saw. This one clarifies it. In most states, an individual can't legally sell alcohol to another individual, which is why eBay and other online retailers don't allow it. Kentucky's vintage spirits law, which allows sales to licensed retailers, is a rare exception. But what is the letter of the law when it comes to selling vintage antique spirits known as Dusties in a bluegrass state? Okay, here it is. The vintage bourbon law. Under House Bill 100, passed by the state legislature in 2017 and cranked into action the following year, licensed retailers can purchase spirits from unlicensed individuals, like collectors, and sell those products to the public in adherence with the state regulations. So as I mentioned before, a lot of these private collections are sometimes they're collected under shady measures. So maybe, you don't know where these guys got their whiskey. Like if I brought you some Pappy 25, how do you know where that came from? Like, because you're buying it from a regular civilian, a collector that's not a liquor store. They're not gonna have like invoices or anything like to trace where that thing came from. I mean, it could have been like inherited as a gift. Who knows? Perhaps it went through the black market and then sold to that individual. So maybe that's why this store got raided. Is maybe some of the whiskeys they don't have a proper explanation on where they got it from, or maybe one of the whiskeys was sold to them by the black market, or maybe they had some kind of undercover sting where they sold rare whiskey to the store and they're not supposed to, according to the law. Vintage distilled spirit sellers unlicensed by the state for the sale of alcohol, and administrator, executor, receiver, other fiduciary who receives and sells vintage, creditor who receives, takes possession of the products, payment for debt, other individuals who do not sell alcohol and sold on an occasional basis an amount of 24 vintage or less. Oh, I see. This might be this is probably the most reasonable thing, where a single person cannot sell more than 24 vintage bottles in 12 months. So I guess that makes sense, because if you have one person who has all these, that's a lot. If one person has sold more than 24 in a 12-month period, that is kind of shady. It's like, how do you have this? Like, one rare bottle is very hard to do. Like, how the heck is this person selling 24 rare spirits in 1 year? So maybe that's why. Maybe they bought it from somebody who violated that rule. I mean, we can only speculate because they're not really telling us why, like, what's happening here. Those who can purchase from unlicensed sellers and turn that product around for public sale are licensed retailers purchasing on licensed premises. So you have an unlicensed seller, which is a person or a collector, selling it to a licensed liquor shop. Okay, and products must be marked with a conspicuous sticker not readily removable on the bottle and container stating vintage distilled spirit. The product cannot be owned by a distillery and must be in its original unopened container. And it also cannot be available for purchase otherwise from a licensed wholesaler. I mean, okay, so this makes sense because, obviously if it's open, then you don't know it got changed to something else. Kentucky Bourbon secondary market. The law is seemingly unique, allowing the bluegrass state to cultivate a retail market for highly sought after and exclusive products as a secondary market, noted by Vine Pair. Vintage bottles such as pre-prohibition whiskeys or rare aged spirits from defunct distillers can command thousands of dollars. So yeah, like some of these old distilleries, sometimes they still have whiskey, even though they're abandoned. For example, Brick Lottie, when they were purchased and renovated, they discovered that there was rick houses full of old whiskeys. They're eventually sold off, but they were, they become extremely rare because think about how many years they've been just sitting there and aging, and they weren't even being bottled or sold. So when Brick Lottie got bought out and revived, some of the seed money to help create the new whiskey that under the Brick Lottie name, when they were reviving the company, they had to sell some of those whiskeys in order to fund, get the distillery back up and running again. And now when they got revived, they created a lot of award-winning whiskeys, such as the Octomore, which is one of, at the time was the most heavily peated whiskey at the time. I mean, now there's like a few more, but it was the first one that, they were like, this is the most peated smoky whiskey that's in the market. I think it's like 150 something parts per million the phenol content. Of course, pre-prohibition whiskey is expensive as well, obviously, because that was almost 100 years ago. So yeah, that was the article. I just thought that was very interesting that they got raided, even though this is meant to allow people to sell vintage spirits. So I'm wondering what they did, or how this famous vintage bottle store got raided and what they're being accused of. And we saw the laws earlier, and I mean, obviously I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really, and I'm sure the explanation of the law is just a summary and not the actual it's not the full details. So we don't know. Maybe it's a technicality and the shop owners misunderstood, so it could have been just a unintentional mistake or something. Well, anyways, I was wondering, like, do you guys collect rare whiskeys? And what's the most expensive whiskey you've had or seen? And leave it on the comments below on what you guys think about this. Or, until we get any information, I want to figure out what caused this raid. Because a lot of people, this is, like they mentioned, this is one of the few states that allows this, sale from an unlicensed collector. So anyways, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.